Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our second in our fall series, Scribe in the Enterprise. Today's topics, SharePoint integration and multi-site CRM data synchronization. I'm Libby Bishop. I'm the East Enterprise and Public Sector Sales Manager for Scribe. And also with me today is Pierre Hulsebus, Senior Pre-Sales Engineer. And Pierre, if you go to the next slide, we're going to just go over just a few logistics, and then we'll get started in the presentation. So the phone lines are muted. We're going to take probably 45 to 50 minutes for the content and presentation that Pierre will be doing. If at any time you think of a question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat window over on the GoToWebinar. And then at the end, we'll collect all the questions and we'll do a Q&A session to address all your questions. I also wanted to let you know as well that we will be recording this, and we will make the recording and the actual presentation available to you. So I know many times that's a question that always comes up front. So recording and presentation will be available. All right, Pierre, we'll go over the agenda. As I had mentioned, we'll talk about SharePoint and CRM integration and drill down a little bit deeper into that concept. You're probably saying, well, they're already integrated. So we'll talk about the integration that Microsoft provides, and then how you can, with Scribe, take that a little bit farther. Then Pierre will talk about multi-site data synchronization, and we'll look at it a couple of ways. First of all, a lot of questions we get are about syncing data between your test, development, and production environments. Then we'll also talk about syncing multiple CRM sites, whether you've got like a corporate site and then you've got divisions, or maybe you have agencies that you need to keep all in sync. So Pierre will talk about that. And then we'll also talk about when we discuss syncing multiple sites, are we talking about integration or replication? So Pierre will go over the distinctions and the ways that you can do this multi-site synchronization. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session. The other thing I would like to solicit your input on is some webinar topics for the enterprise or advanced concepts that you would like for us to present. So please be thinking about those and give us some suggestions on content that's relevant to you for our next webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pierre.
Excellent. Thanks, Libby. Thanks, Libby. All right. Well, let's get right into it. We'll talk about SharePoint integration, as we mentioned. So Scribe, if you're aware of Scribe and how our systems work, we have what we refer to as adapters. Adapter approaches allow us to be kind of modular in the way that we build integrations out. So we have adapters, for example, for Dynamics and for Salesforce. Several different ERP applications in the Microsoft Dynamics stack. So those are connections that are built right into the API of the applications. When we connect into SharePoint, one of the methods that we use, Scribe has a generic web services adapter, a SOAP web services, and I'll show that to you here in a second and how that particular solution works. So when we're connecting into something like SharePoint, we're going to use the SharePoint's web services front end in order to connect to that. And so that allows us to kind of get in there and work with the tool as it sits. So one of the questions that comes up, CRM does have a integration already in it, and we'll talk about that. So I'll show you, or we'll talk through some of the use cases for where folks would be using something like Scribe outside of the CRM integration that's already provided by Microsoft Dynamics. And so one of those is the concept of when you're doing a migration of data into CRM. From another system, and so we're kind of migrating over to Dynamics CRM. That's a case typically where Scribe is used to create the directories inside of SharePoint automatically Because if you're familiar with the way that SharePoint works, and I'll show you a couple slides here in kind of the user interface, but why it would be helpful maybe to pre-populate some of those directories already, because effectively the CRM integration is a client-side integration. You have to click on the account record, answer a question, and then it propagates the site. So if you're, pre-populating a system with, let's say, 100,000 records, you don't want to click 100,000 times and answer 100,000 yes questions. So it's that level. Other folks might be looking at SharePoint as a portal strategy, kind of the concept of being able to interact with dynamic CRM data from, or SharePoint, or data from the SharePoint perspective. So we really maybe want to replicate cases or something like that into the SharePoint site, so somebody outside of the the context of dynamic CRM from the SharePoint perspective would be able to work with the tool. So we're all familiar with, or if you're not, this is how it looks like when you go into dynamic CRM. You open up an account record and you click on the documents library node on the left-hand side, and it will prompt the user to say, a folder is going to get created. And so this account structure that is set up right here, this hierarchy, is established by an administrator, and it may or may not fit within the hierarchy strategy that is already in, let me say, an existing SharePoint hierarchy. So if you look at the topology here, it's under sites and then CRM documents and then accounts, and then it has one for the demo account. And then if I have a case, let's say it would have a different topology, or it would say CRM docs, and then it would have a slash, and then it would say, incidents, and then it would be the incidents underneath that particular account. So the topology is established by settings inside of the CRM system, and don't always match up exactly with the hierarchy that's been established already. If you already have an existing SharePoint infrastructure and you want this location to be in a different system, it's a little more of a challenge there to do that with the out-of-the-box configuration. So what Scribe offers is the ability, and this is, I'm showing you here what the step control is. During the account insert process, it would go and have this execution of creating the folder and then inserting any sort of documents that might be relevant to that account. So a lot of times when we are doing migrations, whether it's from something like a Lotus Notes or some other application that has a library of documents, we're just pointing to those physical files, and the step for document insert would move those documents in over at the time of the account insert. So the folders and everything would already be pre-populated by during the account migration or the account insert process. So a user doesn't have to do this particular part of the process, and then they would go, all the documents would already be in there. Another, so as we were saying, the hierarchy that's established by Dynamics CRM, you might have a little different methodology that you want to do. You might want to put, instead of it being in a CRM_docs location, you might want to stick it in a different location. And so by having, it in Scribe, that's one of the things that you're able to do is modify the pathing statements and make it a little more dynamic. And so from a user's perspective, when you move the data over, the attachments just move right along with them. So Scribe has many different attachment methods that we can handle different files, file formats, or moving them from either blob files in SQL or actual physical file locations. So we can replicate this kind of methodology inside of the workbench, the Scribe workbench. So another scenario that's pretty common is help desk tickets, where people are using SharePoint for maybe their IT piece, and certain tickets that they have or cases in CRM need to show up inside of their SharePoint. So let's go over to one of our images that I've got here. So one of the methods here, so we've got our little SharePoint site here, and this is where my IT tickets would go for this organization. And then over here in Dynamic CRM, I've got all my cases that we have opened up inside of the system. Some are open, some are closed, they're in different states and statuses, so these are the current list of active cases. So inside of Scribe Insight, what we're doing is we're connecting to the Dynamics CRM application. So when you work with Scribe Insight, as I mentioned, there's a couple different methods. We have these what we refer to as adapters. So you've got an adapter to connect into Dynamics CRM as my source. So I'm going to go here into settings. And so it's just a username and password pointing to the URL for this particular integration. So that's how we get data out of Dynamics CRM. We have this connector. And then we are connecting to, as I mentioned, the web services adapter for the SharePoint site. So this is just the URL for the, if I go in here to adapter settings, we can see the connection string information here. Actually, if I hit here and into the web services, what we call the web services adapter. So these are just the URLs for the different websites that we're working with, or the different SharePoint sites. And the way that Scribe works with SOAP Web Services is you just point to the WSDL for that particular document library or SharePoint site. So it's just pointing to the WSDL for this particular place, inside of SharePoint. And then Scribe, what we do is we then flatten out all of the executable, web service calls that are available for this adapter. So getting lists or deleting content or adding lists, all the different things that are supported by this particular document library, all of those become methods that we can work with, whether that's updating or inserting the data. No, cancel, close. So when we go in here, we've got a very simple scenario of just bringing those, and I'm executing the update list items, so that is the list items that are part of this particular IT ticket that we're connecting to. Now I'm going to push this button here for us to run it manually, but typically this is automated, of course. This would be running on some sort of schedule. Scribe has a schedule here. And so as we pull out of the data out of Dynamics CRM, our adapter shows us all the objects that are part of the CRM object, model, basically. And so we're working specifically here with the incident object itself. And then we're also pulling in the child object of annotations, which would be any sort of attachments that might be needed. And in this particular one, I'm not doing any filtering just for simplicity's sake today, but you would, of course, add some sort of condition to this where you might be looking at very specific owners or record types or case types or things on this order. And Scribe can do all of that. It sees all of the metadata layer inside of Dynamics CRM, so any of the fields that are part of that particular object. So if I'm filtering out on incidents and I only want where the case type code is a certain case type, I would be able to do that in terms of filter, to filter the data out. So this is nabbing the data. This is one method. And then once you have your data mapped, so I've already got my mappings done down here, you can preview the results of that in your preview. So I hit the little checkbox there, and in the Scribe Workbench, what it does is it lets you see the kind of what it predicts the data movement across the system would be. So if I go to my first record here, in the system there's about 30 records in the data set. So I can see, what it's pulling out from the record itself, what the incident looks like. And I can continue through here. It's showing me the different customer names for this. It's showing me the excuse me. It's showing me the title of the case. We've got ones that are for missing parts and need shipping information, exactly all of that stuff. It shows you what it believes the execution would be. This is a single-step workbench, so it's not super sophisticated, very straightforward. If they have multiple steps, it would show you, kind of branching logic and multiple steps through that process. And I'm just going to go ahead and execute it from here. When you execute this, as I mentioned, I'm just executing this from the workbench file aspect. Typically, this would be an automated process and be running on a schedule in the background. So I'm going to go over here to our tickets. I'm just going to hit refresh here. And so now we have all those tickets, that have been or in CRM are now part of SharePoint. And so, obviously you can go through and pull the data out of SharePoint. You can determine what kind of rules you want to have to send back into the system, but this is how this integration works from a one-way standpoint. But many customers using it this way, very happy with that method. Help desk tickets is a good example of this. Another one is list management. So folks would use a list for maybe marketing purposes, and they want to output that list out there and build campaigns appropriately. So the methods that we're using in here are pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, some of the connection information that we have. Whenever you're working with SharePoint, you're working with a SOAP web service. So when you send data over, you have to be familiar with a little bit of the formatting that SharePoint requires. We have, for what we refer to as our inside track training, Scribe has provided there's actually a full on about an hour and 20-minute training on dealing with some of the different type of formatting issues that you have. So these are a couple, as I mentioned, kind of in review here, a couple of the different strategies. One is when we were migrating data into CRM, and we want to have that thing ready right now, so you can really still utilize the same built-in integration, but have all the sites pre-populated for the users, and you can also put documents in there as part of that migration strategy. When you're looking at the integration level, once somebody has built their CRM and they're moving forward, this you may have all sorts of business processes for populating and propagating SharePoint sites for cases and for opportunities, all of those types of things where you need to maybe move specific documents into SharePoint during an event-driven process. And because Scribe is very event-driven, we can notice exactly when an opportunity reaches a specific stage, and then create a SharePoint site and move a certain subset of documents into that, so the quoting templates are ready, and whatnot. So you have this kind of front end for automating the process to use the tools within SharePoint. So hopefully that answers some questions. And again, if you guys, as Libby said earlier, if you guys have any questions relative to SharePoint, feel free to put them in our questions and answer area, and we'll do our best to answer them towards the end of our session today. Now, the next thing we want to kind of shift over to is what we call a multiple point data distribution, or federation is another term that's used to talk, and Scribe is often used to help keep systems in synchronization. Obviously, we often are doing ERP to Dynamics CRM or SharePoint or Salesforce.com integrations, where we're taking data from one system and putting it into another system and keeping the customer records aligned and the data aligned appropriately. One of the other things that's coming up quite a bit here this last year has been the need to maintain concurrency between environments and look at Dynamics environment as a distributed kind of hierarchy where we have to maintain concurrency of data from a change in one CRM system at the headquarters, and make sure that that same amount of data and those records have the exact same look and feel in the test development and maybe even the training environments. So we wanted to talk through this process and some of the different strategies that occur for this. Now, so again, Microsoft has a instance replication system that will copy data from parent to child. It's really a batch process, so you kind of have to push the button. You have to have one system set up for each one of these in order to do that. And so Scribe, of course, we want to talk about automating this environment and just doing this in the background so this happens automatically. So when somebody starts to work in their training, in their CRM system, when we talk about things like user adoption and success in training, when you're working with your data, and it's not some sort of sample company, but it's real live data, that has a tremendous benefit for the end users. The same thing with the development environment. When the development environment contains actual customer records and all of the things that we may be doing on a reporting level or custom development work where you're hardwiring global unique identifiers into JavaScripts, those types of things. This is the type of reason why it's helpful to have the exact copy, a replicated version of this. In the past, it was not as much of an issue because we didn't have like this CRM online environment. So a lot of methods, a lot of folks would literally take the database that was in their CRM main environment and then just copy that database and restore them into these different training environments. And that seemed like a good idea, and in some ways that's definitely a doable process if you're all on premise. But imagine if you're online, or if you don't want to just keep overwriting the data that's in there, you just want to keep appending to it new data. There might be purposes for that. If I have a development environment that's active and I'm working on, and I've got my code in there, I don't want to just keep deleting the data and overriding it. It'd be better just to give me new records in there and let me continue to work on my development, because, of course, all of the developed code that I'm working on is part of the database. So if I just delete the database and restore from main over to my dev environment, I'm not doing myself any favors here. I'm basically getting a copy of the main system. So the records change, but also I would be losing all my code that I've been working on in process. So this is a big, as you can kind of imagine, the bigger your organization and the more formal your IT process gets, this becomes a big issue. This becomes a big issue. The nuances of maintaining a good, valid development environment or multiple development environments become really critical to long-term success in our customers. So this is one of the use cases that we see happening all the time, and so we'll talk. I'll show you here using Scribe Online how we're addressing this particular one. Another one that comes quite often, and again, this is really telling of where the enterprise space in Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Salesforce.com is going. It's just interesting to see the evolution of this. Now we have large organizations that are using Dynamics CRM or SharePoint to manage very large distributed CRM systems. And so when we talk about distributed CRM, what I'm referring to is this, there's not just one CRM system and everybody's dialing into that headquarters system with the username and a password. Every user has access to different systems. So folks in my branch office, number one, that's a local CRM installed, or that might be a sales or a CRM online instance. And the CRM main system would be maybe an on-premise environment. So this kind of hybrid world where my branch offices are CRM online and my headquarters is on-premise. The security on those systems are different, and yet I still need to replicate the data across that environment. And when I talk about distributed CRM, we think about this, that the offices themselves may own a record, and what I see in Office 1 would be different than what is in Office 2. It wouldn't be replicating all the data from the main to all the different branches. It would be, for example, taking business unit number 1 to Office number 1, business unit number 2 in the main system to Office number 2, and so on and so forth, and having to go out to many different offices. And so this year we have piloted and worked with several different customers where these branch offices could be into the several thousand kind of things. So if you think of a franchise operation or some restaurants that might have or brokerage firms or many different kind of business use cases where the branch offices are running a local copy of CRM or a CRM online or a Salesforce instance, and my main headquarters contains all the data, but all of these guys contain subsets. So that is another use case that we see for this. There's many other ones, but those are two that I think come to top of mind when we talk about distributing out CRM. I have another one. I didn't make a little chart for it, but I think about it like a round robin, where you might have 3 main CRM systems, and those CRM systems need to synchronize or maintain a certain subset of each other's data, and it's more like a ring topology. And we see this in financial services where the different divisions are not allowed legally to see all the information from one division to another. So they establish a kind of demarcation areas of what kind of data you can see from a customer's record. So if you have, let's say, a division in your bank that does mortgages, and I have another one that does commercial invoicing, or financing, those two divisions may, because of their regulatory regulations, not be able to replicate the transactional level of the data, but I could say that John Smith is a customer of the other division. And here's the owner of that record. And so I can transact this kind of peer-to-peer type of topology too. So that's another topology that we're seeing come up even again in some of the more highly regulated environments where they've got 3 or 4 CRM systems, one for each division. So a couple things that always come up during these conversations when we're talking about these. Do we want to duplicate the GUIDs? So specifically in Dynamics CRM, the unique identifier, the record ID that underlies the record that you see on the screen, do you want to replicate the record, or do I want to duplicate the record? That actually becomes an important distinction, because things like cross-reference table and ownership and uniqueness become an important then part of the implications. If I duplicate those records, then I can't have, I just have to consider that in my integration. So one of the things that a lot of our customers are doing is duplicating GUIDs, because then your cross-reference tables, all your lookup tables, those are exactly the same across all the environments. And also your things like cross-referencing with ERP systems, all of those types of lookups and views for reporting purposes will look the same across all your different environments. And Scribe has the ability to either create a GUID or send over a record and say, here's all the data for the record, create it, and have the system generate a unique GUID, or we can use this particular GUID. So we can replicate the data as opposed and duplicate the data. So there's 2 different ways. Record passing. So as we were saying, if I have branch operations, who owns that particular contact record? If I'm in branch number 1 and I'm owned by this particular branch, and this is where I go, but next week I maybe don't like the people at branch number 1 and I want to go work with people at branch number 2, there has to be some sort of accommodation for how you pass that record from one one organization or one CRM system to another, and the integration has to accommodate that. If there's an approval process that needs to happen back and forth, we worked on a project this summer that had that particular kind of process, and there's different strategies around that, whether you have a little stubby version of the record at different locations, and then there's an approval process that goes up to headquarters, somebody says okay, and then then the record passing process happens that moves not only the data record owner to a new branch, but also all of the attachments for the documents that might be associated with that. So it's a use case that you need to consider of something like record passing. So like we're saying, how does a branch go in and say, hey, I want this record? There just has to be some sort of understanding about the use case for that and the business model behind that. Branch operations, security, and record ownership. Again, depending on the type of systems you have, you may have literally completely different Active Directory, different domain types, even different security authentication methods. So if you're doing a Scribe online, or excuse me, CRM online with a CRM on-premise, you're going to have to build somewhere in the environment a cross-reference methodology to talk about, to be able to say this particular business unit equals this unique identifier from one system to another. So you have to build either some external system. Scribe has the ability to manage cross-reference tables internally. But really big, important part of this is really understanding the different security models that might be out at your branch locations. Branch attachments is another part of this thing when you talk about attachments, because attachments are large bandwidth. And so when you're moving attachments, across the network, that can actually, you have to consider that in your network. So, one of the real common challenges, especially when we're dealing with a branch operation, is that the network itself is not usually high speed. It's usually, it's not a, if it's a VPN or whatever, but if I say I'm handling large attachments in this system, I have to consider the impact of moving 50 attachments, of which may be 5 megs each, and so during that movement of records, I might be sucking up all the bandwidth on the network during that process. So you've got to consider and test for that kind of performance issues that might come along the way. Scribe can move the data. It's just there's a network that it has to move that across, and so you've got to consider maybe we move the attachments after hours, or maybe we move them a certain period of time. So you move part of the record at one point, but the rest of it comes over later on. So again, it's more around the business process, but it's one thing that we've found as we've been working with different organizations in these distributed environments. The WAN performance, is very, because it's a closed network, and so it's not very dynamic. So I might only have a T1 out to a branch, or a sub T1 out to a branch to handle all my voice and data. And so if I move 50 megs of data in a workbench file process, that might cause problems with the phone system, believe it or not. So these are some of the considerations that you have to have when you're building out this topology. So I wanted to show you Scribe online and how the system works. Let me give you a bit of a quickie overview of because not everybody's familiar with the Scribe, the way that our system works with Scribe online. So when you work with Scribe online, you're working from a web browser, and the web browser is going to manage the integration that you're going to build. Now, the data actually gets moved by what's referred to as an agent. So there is somewhere has to be installed an agent. So an agent can be installed either on the cloud, so you can have a cloud-based agent, and that can talk to CRM online. And if you had that kind of world, you would never need to do anything on premise. If I could just do a CRM online to another CRM online, or a Salesforce to CRM online, Those are all cloud-based apps, and a cloud-based agent would work for that. Or if I was going to an on-premise, that agent can be installed on-premise. The agent is just a 20 megabyte file. It's not very big. It runs as a single service on this machine that it would get installed on. And because it sits on the other side of the firewall, it's able to access all this local data in order to get to CRM on-premise. So this agent here can not only talk to the on-premise data, but it can also talk to a CRM online. So a pretty common scenario for us is to install the on-premise agent next to the CRM server inside of headquarters, and then just have that agent connect out to the branch operations, all the different branch connections out to the other systems that we're going to do. That online agent, when it's on-premise, can also talk to multiple CRM systems in the environment. So that can work that way. And so let me give you just a little taste of the what Scribe Online looks like and how we kind of manage a system like this here. So let me my little PowerPoint slides in front of the. Sorry, let me get my all right, Chrome, where are you? Okay, that's weird. I don't know where my Chrome went. Okay, window up. All right, so CRM or Scribe Online. Let's go right here to Scribe Online. Come on. Logging in here too. So as I say, Scribe Online is a web-based interface. So my user interface is here through the web site, and I log in with the username and password. All right, so it's logged in. Come on. With Scribe Online, you have, as we mentioned, agents. So I'm logged into an instance, and I have two different agents. One's installed on a machine, and the other is a cloud-based agent. And you install the agents, and then what you do from there is you configure what are called connections. The connections are just like, if you're familiar with Scribe Insight, just like that. You can have connections to different technology-based connections. They can be SQL connections. They can be connections to CRM online or CRM on-premise. Come on, connections. Once you have your connections built, you can go in then from there and build your mappings from one system to another. And So the connections, as they're saying, you have different connections that are available. So I've got different connections I've already built to test and dev and CRM, and it gives them different color codes for the different connections. So you can, in one environment, connect to multiple different CRM systems from there. Once you have your connections built, then I'm going here into solutions, and it's showing different solutions. I have different integrations that are running. In this particular one, I have ones that are going from my ERP into my master CRM system, so they're managing the account integration and sales orders integration. But in this particular one, I want to manage my CRM to CRM integration here. So I'm highlighting that and clicking on it, and then you tell it what agent that I want to use, and I'm using the agent that's on the machine. And then from there you go in and you build your actual mappings. So if you're familiar with Scribe, and for some of you I'm sure this is the first time you've ever seen Scribe online, and so I'll give you a little bit of orientation. On the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side over here, I have my control blocks, and I'm able to choose the different control blocks for the different pieces of data that I want to build. And so I'm going to drop and drag my control blocks from one system to the other system. So the first one is you always start off with some sort of query. So I would drop this in and then get my query. If I double-click in here, I can say, okay, I want my account data, so I choose account in here. Now, one of the things that's really cool with Scribe Online is I can handle what we refer to as hierarchical data. So underneath an account, obviously I have contacts and I have tasks, appointments. I have all these other kind of child objects that I might want to be able to bring in. So let's say I want to bring in the contracts too along with this. And the contracts, there's different ways that you could be a contract. I can actually have two different child relationship with contracts. I can be the biller or the customer on a contract. But you can add an unlimited amount of child entities within this account record. So I could say I want the account and the contracts and appointments and contacts and tasks. When we're working with this, we might also want to filter the data out. So a very common way might be to look at category codes and have different integrations, one for prospects and one for customers, or maybe you're putting in your dev environment all of the records, or maybe I only want a subset of those records, maybe in a certain business unit. So if I want something that's in a particular business unit, you have this. You have those types of things you can filter out. You're able to do filtering around these different owners and records around that. So like the owning business units. So you can add the business unit in there for ownership. So say I only want the ones right now for this particular integration that are from a particular business unit. So that defines your query. So that gives me my data, and then the next one is for each result. That's the only little puzzle piece that fits next along the way. These puzzle pieces work together. Only certain ones can fit in there, so I can't yet use this particular one because it wouldn't fit in there. This environment is built around a user interface design language called Scratch. Scratch is used for children to help them learn programming syntax. It's something that came out of MIT. It's used in things like Lego League, and it just helps you. And so we've kind of adopted this motif and kind of followed along and said, yeah, no, this will be great for our kind of non-developers to make sure they get the syntax correct. So by only being able to nest the certain right things in the right place, you're able to get your kind of logic proper. So the only one that fits after the query is for each result. So for each result we get, for each account out of here, I need to do something. I need to create something. So the first thing I need to do is I got a couple different targets that I can work with. So I've got two different targets. I've got my CRM demo server, I've got dynamic CRM, and I've got CRM2. So when I choose CRM2, this one was having a problem here. Sorry about that. Let's go back here and open this one up. Refresh here on my screen. Anyway, so where I was going with that is, I think I'm having some bandwidth issues here maybe, but so where I was going with that was you're able to manage multiple targets in that. You can have, so we've just released this feature that allows you to have, multiple CRM connections, and you're able to kind of drop and drag your control blocks into those different entities. So let's get back into here. So Scribe Online is one method. The other method that that we're able to work with is Scribe Insight. So another methodology that's used for that type of solution, Scribe Insight uses the Microsoft message queuing as a backbone to be able to consolidate data from branch servers. So if I have server in my headquarters, and then out in Scribe land I've got other servers that sit on the network, they're able to publish data out to a Scribe in queue that sits on my headquarters server, and then that ultimately goes into the main CRM system. Now the benefit of using the message processing in the Scribe publishers to do this is that the Microsoft message queuing works really efficiently over slow network connections. So if you do have a WAN that isn't super efficient, this method works really, really well. The Microsoft Message Queue has what's called guaranteed delivery, and so that will manage the transport layer around the messages published out of the CRM systems in your branches to make sure they show up in the headquarters. It also manages encryption across the network. So this is more transactional based, and is a good methodology if you are using across, let's say, a kind of a wide area network where I don't have always a steady connection, back to the headquarters. So, and with that, let's open it up for some questions.
Pierre, I have our first question, and the first question is, where can I get a description of the Sharepoint web service commands and formulas?
The commands and formulas for SharePoint, well, there's the technical WSDL which describes the web services is in the WSDL, but we have in our training guide some of the things in the training program that we put together has some of it describes some of the different methods and how to execute them. It also does show it inside of the what those different methods that you can use when you have a web service as your target. So it shows you all the different methods that you can do, all the things you can execute. When you work with a web service, you execute, like a get file or a get list, and then so those are also described in the adapter.
Thanks, Pierre. I have another question. You mentioned Inside Track. Can you tell me what Inside Track is?
So Inside Track is a training program that addresses a lot of the advanced issues that partners and customers have access to. It's a subscription-based training service.
And I can add a little bit onto that as well. Most of you as partners have taken Scribe certification, so this Inside Track can contain the certification. We have a couple different subscriptions. One includes all your certification, and then the additional piece of it are these advanced concepts or tips and tricks, and these are updated quarterly. So similar to your certification, you can buy a subscription for one person, or we actually have a corporate subscription. So as a partner, if you've got more than 3 or 4 people, sometimes a corporate subscription to this Inside Track is a more cost-effective way to go for not only certification but the advanced tips and tricks. So, see if we have any other questions. And while we're looking at the questions, the slide that's in front of you, just to make sure you know who your contacts are at Scribe. There is an enterprise team in addition to myself on the East region. There's Courtney Connor on the West region, and Ashwana and EMEA. And then your regional sales managers, there's a list of your West and East, Brian McMurray, Scott Thompson, and then in the UK, Hank and Andre in Germany. So these are your contacts. And let me get another question. All right, one final question deals with Scribe Online, and is there a way to get a not-for-resale license as a partner for Scribe Online, similar to Insight? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. So if you do not have a not-for-resale license and you are a partner, if you'll reach out to one of those contacts that I just put up on the screen, we're more than happy to get you set up with a not-for-resale license for Scribe Online as well. And that's all the questions I have. Again, I was hoping that we might have some suggestions for future topics. So if you can't think of any today but would like to send either me or Pierre one, or anybody on the list here, please do that, because we'd like to be able to talk about topics that are important to you. And Pierre, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll have another one probably late November, early December. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye.